the Parks, Trails and Lakes Commission workshop meeting for December 1st, 2020. Do you want to take roll call, Jamie?
Terry Steenblock.
Here.
Tim Miller.
Here.
Jason Steenblock.
Here.
Doug Ramseth.
Here.
Tim Gary.
Present.
Karen Moorhead.
Here.
And Betty Geyer.
Here. All right, working our way down, we are looking for approval of the agenda for tonight's meeting.
I move we approve the agenda.
Second.
So we have a motion by Doug and a second, I think, by Jason. Do we have any discussion? All right, hearing no discussion. Jamie, do you want to do roll call?
Terry Steenblock.
Aye.
Tim Miller.
Aye.
Jason Steenblock.
Aye.
Doug Ramseth.
Aye.
Tim Gary.
Aye.
Karen Moorhead.
Aye.
And Betty Geyer.
Aye.
All right, and then next on the agenda, Jamie, I don't see anybody on for open forum. Did you receive any written comments?
Not have any open forum submissions for tonight.
Okay. All right, well then I guess we will move on to the meat of the agenda, which is the 10-year park plan.
All right, thank you, Terry. So commissioners, this evening we're continuing our work on our 10-year park plan, and just kind of backing up a little bit. We've been working through this over the last couple of months, and we've decided to try to meet every couple of weeks to break down the different strategies and sections that we identified in a work session. So tonight our focus is going to be on the first one, which was replacing, repairing, and renewing of our existing park facilities. So we will cover that tonight. But in conjunction with that, we also have a new task, which will be our main focus tonight, is to look at our 10-year plan and of what we've identified as needs from the community through community feedback and just the work sessions that we've had, and through the city's strategic plan. We will look at what we've identified and work on coming up with some costs on anything that we know and anything we can make some estimates on. So that came about from recent council meetings, city council meetings. They received a 10-year financial plan for a review, and there was a little park representation, but nothing as significant for different placeholders of upcoming projects. So that was commented as potentially being underrepresented in the 10-year plan. So Chair Steenblock did speak at the city council meeting last Monday, November 23rd, and did address the city council just with some concerns and questions on that. So the feedback from city council for us was to, again, put together some cost estimates on what we know currently in our plan and things that we can make some good estimates on. So with that being said, I have been working on reaching out to other communities who have done similar projects to what we've identified. I've looked at some of the costs that we've received from Bolton and Menk for Belts Park, other quotes we've received for different projects. So I've summarized this in a document for tonight, and I'll share my screen here momentarily. So we will look through this together, and our goal tonight is to come up with this list of projects we've identified with some estimated costs that we can present to city council. And we do have Councilmember Bystrom here to represent from city council and make sure that we're submitting or providing what was asked of us from city council. So with that said, our goal tonight is really to fill in this worksheet, make any changes. And this is a workshop setting, so no formal action tonight, just work together on coming up with a information for city council. So with that said, I'm going to get my screen share set up here for you guys. Are there any questions before we start the discussion tonight?
Said Terry did a great job last night, or at the planning commission.
Yeah.
All right, so we will get this shared here. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so can everyone see this okay? Let me just
Yes.
Okay, so I'll go through this quick and then we can turn it over for discussion. So I put together just a list here of things that we've talked about or that we've identified as priorities within our 10-year plan. Please note that these are tentative projects, so nothing's approved, and these are complete cost estimates at this time. Again, the cost estimates are based on either quotes we've received, other communities who've done similar projects, things from our 2014 master plan where we've had some pricing as a guide. So that's where these numbers have come from. So these are not exact figures, but conservative estimates. So we will go through this. Might see if I can get it in a different format so I can zoom out a little so we can have you guys see both pages at once, I think here. Okay, can everyone see those side by side?
Yeah.
Okay.
Barely.
Barely. Okay, so I'll make it bigger and then we'll just kind of go through them one at a time here. So can you see this? Is that better?
Yes.
You can even, let's see if we can do this. Okay, this is pretty big, but we'll just go through them one at a time so everyone can see them. So I started with the most obvious one, the Belts Park redevelopment project. We received a quote from Bolton and Mank for 1.8 million. I reduced that slightly just because I know there are a few things we've discussed that can be eliminated from that initial quote. So as you can see here, I break down, what we know from that as provided in the quote, that the new building is estimated at $500,000. The sports facilities are $387,000. The playground improvements, $307,500. And then an additional $147,000 for providing paved sidewalks and stairs and ramps throughout the park. Another thing we've talked about is we acquired land for the Fenway Park expansion. So while these are very, tentative plans at a minimum, we've talked about 2 ball fields out there, which are estimated at $25,000 each. Additional bathrooms with a picnic pavilion and lights for the whole complex. Cool Camp Park improvements. We've had several requests for basketball courts out there. I did get this priced out. So the nice sport courts is about $65,000. Some of the equipment out there is outdated. So a cost of that with updated surfacing in the ball fields. We'll talk a little bit more about these park improvements, but there's Summerfield, some improvements for that as part of our playground replacement program, which we'll talk about, but I put in a placeholder for that. The fishing pier, lake access improvements, that's something we can talk through tonight. I don't have a price on that, but we can talk through that. And then trails, we're gonna do trail development, have that meeting in January, so that's to be determined. But I did put in a placeholder of $1 million just because I know trail development is going to be expensive. So we can talk about that if we think we should include that figure to city council, or if we wait until we have that from our January meeting. A lot of dog park estimated at $60,000. And we talked about a new recreational hub, which can be a year-round multi-use facility estimated at $2 million. So this could be the space dedicated for the senior center. So that is what I have so far. Again, taking from the community feedback, our planning sessions. And so I want to turn it over to the Parks Commission to talk through this and see if I'm missing anything, if this is a good representation of the work we have before us. And again, the goal is to present some figures, some dollar amounts to city council on what we know or what we're making a good estimate on. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over to you guys for any discussion to help fill this in for this evening.
So is this to be accomplished over 10 years, or is this to be, do we have a time frame, or is that part of our job here tonight?
So that's a good question, and I missed that piece. The reason for this is the 10-year financial plan that the city has put together did not have any of our parks, trails, and lakes projects because we are working through this 10-year plan currently. And so the initial concept was to add these at once we completed our planning and we're able to get costs associated with the projects. However, the feedback from the recent city council meetings is that they're looking at a 10-year financial plan with parks not fully represented, with some placeholders in there.
Right.
So they want to submit what we know for upcoming costs. So the Belts Park redevelopment project is the best example because we know that's going to be, based on the quote we received, $1.6 million. And this is what you're going to get for that. So this is to be, whatever we come up with, this is to be inserted into the city's 10-year financial plan.
Okay.
So Jamie, if we were looking at this document, and that, I'm just using this as an example, so it's not set in stone, but would an example be on the Belts Park redevelopment project, 500,000 would be earmarked for 2022, for example, and maybe we would earmark an additional 300,000 for 2024. We would either allocate it in one of those years, or we would allocate it across several years if we took it into segments or pieces.
Correct. So right now with the 10-year financial plan, so for example, for like public works, if they know they need a new specific truck in 2025, that dollar amount is put into the 10-year financial plan for 2025. So for tonight, I think starting with looking at the projects and the amounts, I think one of my questions in this process is, do we have to attach, or make recommendations on which fiscal year we're considering each project for to be inserted into the plan? Or is it just, what dollar amounts are we do we foresee in the next 10 years as some of our bigger projects for improvements? But
Carrie, this is Karen Moorhead. I was listening last at the meeting, whenever it was, and I was glad you mentioned belts, but when you say 2022 now, I question what happened to 2021, because we had always talked about getting that as a first start, and I thought maybe you even mentioned it last night. Was that a possibility that we can put something in the 2021 as well?
Yeah, I was just using that as an example just to illustrate that we would have the ability to either, like, if our recommendation would be to put it in one fiscal year or spread it over several fiscal years.
So does this 10-year financial plan, does it start in 2022? Last night, or on the 23rd, City Administrator Casey was talking about many iterations yet to come. So when does the plan start?
that's a good question. Currently, they have it, 2021 is the first year listed in the 10-year plan. So that's what's currently listed. And I know that this document is far from final in the fact that I think it's going to ebb and flow and change. But I think the process with City Council is to have a good understanding of what the potential impact is going to be and what the needs are across all departments. And right now they have a 10-year financial plan that doesn't include some of these bigger projects. They do have some placeholders in there for culture and recreation, starting in, I believe, 2023 or 24, $50,000. And then each year it goes up by $50,000. And that was, I think, discussed in the meeting on November 23rd. But some of these bigger projects are not included in that 10-year financial plan. So obviously that's going to impact having it. Once this is put in there, there's, council's going to have to see that with this is going to obviously look different. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Now, Jamie, does the, in this piece, these are all the capital improvement projects. Is there a separate line item then for like just the regular operating budget maintenance line items?
I think that there is, but I don't know that, I think the focus for right now is some of the larger capital projects to plan for. And I think that's where the culture and, in my interpretation, is the culture and recreation piece would potentially support some of that activities and programs. What's currently in there as a placeholder. I'm not certain, but that's how I would understand that. $50,000, and then the next year it's $100,000. The next year it's $150,000. I think that placeholder would, accommodate some of those other just community events or things like that. Given that that's a culture and recreation item.
That's exactly what I was gonna ask Tim also, because of the because what we've been doing lately is the land versus the money that's coming in just to keep working. So it's like there does have to still be two separate kind of accounts for that. So thanks for bringing that up, Tim.
Think about this as more like your general fund funding. It's not the park dedication fees. This would be, I use the term general fund, and I don't know if that's the right term, but that's what we would use at the state level. This would be the pot of money that's coming from the general fund and allocated to parks or allocated to police or fire or wherever it would be. So in addition to this, there would be potentially park dedication fees or land swapping in addition to this ask.
Sure,
Yeah, and I think with this exercise, it's, what are the projects identified and what's a cost estimate for them based on what we know? And again, looking at what other communities have done very similarly to what we're looking to do. But again, this is just to give them an idea of what those costs might look like. But also there are other ways that we can look at funding some of these projects. So this would potentially get inserted into the 10-year financial plan. But if we're able to leverage grant funding and partnerships, obviously we wouldn't need all that funding in the 10-year plan. So we will look at other revenue sources, but this is just to go over what projects we know we have coming up in the near future based on community input and need.
I would hate to, Karen Moorhead, I would hate to put that into 2023 because we've talked about it for so long, talked about the community must have forgotten all the quizzes we gave them and what they wanted. And the kids certainly graduated a long time ago. But so we were talking about coming up with some money and just being able to do the building. And could the rest of that be in the 10-year plan, but keep the building out so that we can get going on that or not?
Yeah, I think it would almost be easier if we took it into steps and first decided, are these the things from a capital improvement or a large investment? Are these the items that we would want to have on that list or identified? Because these are pretty big, substantial things that aren't going to happen in a year or two if we looked at all of them together. So would it help if we first said yes or no to these things? And are there other things that we would want to replace them with? And then looked at how we would prioritize these and then looked at what years the funding would go across. So if we maybe just took it into, would that maybe be a little bit easier, is figure out what we want first?
it makes sense to me.
Can you scroll down slowly, Jamie, so we
Yep.
can see the list again?
1 second here.
And to Karen, to your point, I would certainly say belts is on the top of my list. And that we would want to ask for some of that money for phase one, as we've discussed previously. If we're going to break it out over to phases, that we do that in, the 2021 year, if that's part of this 10-year plan as it is.
Yeah, I agree. I like the rest of it though. I mean, it looks very similar to what we've been talking about and planning for. It's just, I don't want, I'm worried about it getting lost in the shuffle, I guess, but good idea to separate it so we can, I don't see anything on there that we didn't talk about. Lights at Fenway, do they still have the lights and someone just has to pay to put them up, or do they not have those lights anymore?
We talked about that a while ago, and it sounds like they're out of date. It'd be too hard to retrofit those lights for a LED, from what I remembered, I think.
It's probably true.
Yeah, and I know that there's been talking about priorities. I know that as we look at the expansion of Fenway and doing that expansion, I know eventually we need lights out there. I don't know what that priority level is. And so I think some of them, it's hard to identify the priority in it, but I know that it's something that that's been talked about for a long time. And I feel like if we're going to invest in our athletic complex, you know, adding the lights out there, some time within the 10-year plan would be appropriate. But to Terry's point, yeah, if we want to go through one by one and just make sure that everything on here is accurate in what we've talked about. And I mean, to put together a 10-year plan is quite a bit of work that I know we still have details to flush through. So I think the expectation from council is at least what we know and what we can make an estimate on. And I don't think the expectation is to have a full 10-year plan, financial plan put together. I think it's just some of the main items we know. And so I think that's the focus.
I mean, looking at the list, they all make sense. I don't know what the last one exactly is, the new senior center. So I might have missed a conversation around that one. Unless you want to go through them each. It's up to you.
Well, I can just answer your question on that. So we had talked about the previous Aqua and Third Gear restaurant that's on the lake, of considering acquiring that or some other facility as a recreational hub that can be used year round. And I think one of the conversations to have is, what's the future of our existing senior center facility? You know, is that something that's going to remain for 5 to 10 years? Or will we need to find a new space for that facility? So if we did have one recreational hub, we could incorporate space there for a senior center.
Okay. Thank you.
So could we just, for purposes of, can we just go start from the list and go
Sure.
to make sure everybody's on the same page and we're all okay with each one of these? I know it's a workshop and we're not voting or taking any action, but I'd like to just make sure we all chime in on whether or not we're okay with that.
Yep, that's fine. I think that's a good idea as well. It sounds like just with the Belts Park one, we did talk about looking at, and I'm working on this now, of the building construction. So we do have some park dedication funds available, but maybe the ask for 2021 and the 10-year financial plan is a small amount, so that we have enough to at least get the building done. And then the rest could be at a later year in the 10-year plan.
So on that one, I have a question on that year-round building use at Belts Park. Is that something that we could have the high school kids in construction do? Would that help the cost there, and then it would be a learning experience for them also?
Yeah, I think it's something we can look into, but I don't have the answer right now of like how much that would save. So, yeah, I guess that's kind of a tricky question to answer, but I think that we can explore that when we're really getting into that project.
Okay.
I think we all agree Belts Park that's our next priority in the next 1 to 2 years to have the whole thing completed, right? So we want to try to get as much as we can done in 2021 that funding allows for. And then the rest we would want to ask for in the next fiscal year.
I do think we should just set the stage here. Well, we'll come back to the fiscal year piece. Never mind.
Okay.
Let's figure out if the project we're all in agreement.
So we're not going to worry about the years right now. We're just going to look at the project and the amount. Is that correct?
Correct.
I think that makes sense to me. Okay.
And then it links back to the work that we did with the different strategies. It links back to that strategy number 1 is what we're saying there, right?
Correct.
The repair, replacement, renewal of existing facilities.
Yes.
Okay.
Any questions on the first one? It seems like that one everyone's pretty much in agreement with. All right, so then the next one, the Fenway Park expansion.
I think that that would also be a good stepping stone, is maybe start with the land acquisition that we did, and if we could do that, that would be great.
Okay, any other comments? And you have to remember, this is within like a 10-year plan. So within the next 10 years, is this something, this was an identified priority?
Are we on Fenway?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, long time ago, I was still young yet at the time when that lights came up. So, that would be, again, I look at them, I want it all, but that would be the next priority, because we can make a lot of money as a city when they can have more events at night. So anyway, just my thought. I'm certainly for it.
Okay. All right, so anything else on the Fenway, or are we good with that one?
We're good.
All right, so next, I'm gonna stop my share just for a second and pull up a different slide here really quick. What we originally planned on talking about tonight was, let me just get this up here quick. Hold on one second here. We're originally going to start focusing on that strategy number 1 with the replace, repair, and renew of existing structures. So just really quick, I wanted to jump over to this slide that I put together because it kind of ties into the next couple that we have on the list. And so the list that I have isn't conclusive of everything, but this was just one of the things we talked about, is putting together a playground replacement plan. And generally playgrounds are good for about 10 to 15 years. So here's just a list of some of the up and coming playgrounds that are ready for repair or replacement. Obviously playgrounds have changed quite a bit since the early 2000s. So this is obviously shows we have quite a few coming up that could be due for being replaced. So I just wanted to show this, just so you guys can start thinking about, is part of our plan in this, do we need to add more of our playgrounds within the next 10 years, as a placeholder for improvements? So, let's see. Sorry, something's going on here.
I feel like we should set a goal to do so many. Again, we're looking at 10 years and we're looking at them already being behind. And so I guess my question would be, would it be appropriate to, if you looked at over the course of 10 years, 2 a year?
Yeah. And I think that's what we said in our strategic plan anyways, would be our goal, right?
Yep, we said 1 to 2 parks per year. That includes inclusive equipment and features and addresses gaps.
Right. So I have on here so far Cooling Camp, and I just took an effort to put some items down. We know the basketball courts, and I did get a quote for that, and it came in around 61,000. So new equipment, I put 50,000, and then updating the surfacing. And then we have one more ball field out there to improve. So those are some conservative estimates based on what we know and what other communities have done. So that's how I came up with, I added a little extra. Obviously the numbers aren't adding, but I added a little for construction costs and things like that. So estimated about $250,000 for improvements to Cooling Camp Park.
One of the things that we had talked about for Cooling Camp was improvement of the ad hoc trail that goes through there. And I think, all of these things are good for activities. But I'm wondering about that trail, if that wouldn't just be a nice amenity for people who just want to take a walk in the woods.
Yeah, I think, yeah, we certainly can do that. I wouldn't have a price, like an estimated price on that. And I don't know if, obviously we're going to have a chance to update the 10-year financial plan as we get more granular with things. But I think right now the expectation is to at least put some of the costs in that we know that are to be in as placeholders, because right now there wasn't anything representing some of these bigger projects. So we could certainly update that cost a little bit to accommodate that.
Or do we incorporate it into the trails piece?
Yeah, or incorporate into the trails.
Because I think it's almost like Columbus Park, right? Where they've got the park and then it goes through. It would be that same concept. So could we flag that for the trail discussion in January and incorporate that into another trail opportunity? Because I think we said, we said developed a looped trail within the existing park under our development of new parks and trails.
Right.
So that could be, that could be one of our items under that.
Right.
I think that's a good point. We should list it as the cooling camp trail situation so it doesn't just get lost.
That's good. Thank you.
Jamie, I'm taking the PowerPoint that we did for council. I've got
Sure.
the slides up on my other screen. I'm just going to put cooling camp in parentheses behind
Okay.
that. Number
Yeah, I
2,
mean-
which was developed a loop trail within an existing park.
Okay.
That's okay.
Yep.
So is there on, just for example, just say number Belts Park and Fenway Park, or say Belts Park and Cooling Camp. Would there be a way, if we were working on Belts Park, but a grant came up and for Cooling Camp would we be able to kind of do 2 at once, or 1 1/4 at that time if a grant came up?
Yeah, I think if anytime there's grant opportunities that can help fund these projects, we'll certainly entertain those and pursue them. So I think that this is like assuming that we don't have any other source of funding, we don't have park dedication, and we needed a way to align our funding with our projects. This is what it would cost. And so again, hopefully we can get a DNR grant for the fishing pier, and hopefully we can get like the outdoor recreation grant for accessibility improvements for Belts Park and things like that. So I think timeline and like the year we do the projects is not, I think that's all kind of to be determined. But this is, if we would not have any other funding sources available, how much would we need the city council to plan for in the 10-year financial plan?
Okay.
So we could potentially do 2 projects simultaneously if funding was available sooner, but this would be a way to allow us to plan for these improvements if we didn't have any other funding.
Okay.
So how do we all feel about cooling camp as one of the 10-year priorities?
I'm okay with it.
I like it. It's far away from the kind of center city, so it provides an opportunity for people who are further out.
Good point.
Yeah, and I think it would align with our strategy of, it's on here last installed in 2008. Part of that was improved, but half of the playground equipment is still original from 2008. So that's why I didn't budget as much for the playground equipment, but we did have some other requests come in for improvements to cooling camp, like the basketball courts. So this would be one of the parks in the replacement plan.
I definitely think would be high on my priority list, especially because it hit next the basketball and pickleball courts, which we hear a lot of.
A lot of.
So in my opinion, I think it'd be a good add there.
So Jamie, on cooling camp, I was looking back at the 2014 plan and what was noted there as well. And one of the things they talked about there was paving the lot. Is that something we would want to incorporate here into this as well?
Let me pull that up, but yeah, we could put that in there. I was just gonna see if they had a cost estimate with that. But we could, if you guys think we should pave the lot. Right now, it's just gravel.
Because
But-
they had upgrade and reorient parking lot to maximize space and better service the site. And so I almost feel like if we're gonna make some improvements there and it's on the 10-year plan, I feel like we should include that, but
I agree with you, Terry, and especially
Yeah.
if we're gonna add a ball field, adding capacity to it. If they already saw a need back in 2014 to maximize their parking space, there certainly would be a need if we're gonna add that kind of, those kind of amenities.
yeah.
I will add that I'll talk to, I know when we looked at doing the parking lot, paved parking lot at Cedar Park, I think our estimate was around $60,000. And I believe that was because that was in conjunction with a street project in the area.
Yeah.
So I'll see if I can get a quick estimate from our city engineer on kind of a ballpark cost for that, and add that into this.
Say, Jamie,
Yeah.
I was just wondering, with the paving, the cost for paving, is there any way of like tapping, like say, accessibility money for that? Because that would thus allow easier accessibility for people in wheelchairs or walkers or whatever else, rather than kind of footing the bill the whole way. Would there be some way that we could tap into those funds?
Yeah, that's a good point. I feel like we have a few different parks to consider for a grant to improve safety and accessibility. This would be one of them. I know that to get to some of the ball fields, there's no paved paths over to field 3 and 4, or like the 2 further fields. So it makes it really difficult for people to get out there. So we could consider that as part of this. And again, we're obviously going to continue to seek out grant opportunities. So I think that this could be one where it's improvements for accessibility.
Okay.
But I think
So
our goal is
were
to plan the
using-
costs as if we don't have that available. And then obviously if we are able to get supplemented funding through grants or other partnerships, then that that's reduced from the 10-year financial plan. And there's that less impact there.
And does that money, can you go in and say, okay, we're going to improve accessibility to 4 parks, or does it have to be unique just to one particular park?
I'd have to clarify that. From my understanding with the grant that I'm referring to or thinking of, I believe it's park specific. So one
Okay.
park project is what you're applying for. But not to say that, I can't check on that and confirm, but.
I think the one key thing that Jamie hit on, and I just want to emphasize again, is that all of these potentially have some grant opportunities. So wherever there's a grant that may apply, I think we should pursue it. And if we get it, then it reduces the dollar amount that we would need. And I think it's going to depend on the grant, right? Whether it's typically grants are specific, you're applying for something specific, but again, I think it would depend upon the grant that we're applying for and what the requirements and rules are for the particular grant.
I guess the other thing that I guess I was thinking about when you were talking about paved versus gravel is, I guess I would rather see a gravel parking lot and a ADA compliant playground. So at least the kids that, if they did need it, they could roll across the gravel to get on a playground that was ADA compliant. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, and I think that's very conservative. And I think that, our goal is to have high quality parks, trails and lakes, for people of all ages and abilities. And I feel like if we are making these improvements, it might be good to at least include the cost for the paved parking lot so we can have actual parking stalls, we can have handicap parking spots identified, and maybe we look at some paved trails through the park just to get to the other side of the complex, or at least something, because right now it's all grass and someone in a wheelchair cannot access some of the other fields. So I think it's worth putting in there. I think it's a good point to bring up if we're going to make these improvements. that we should add a cost for that and try to leverage our dollars.
Okay.
And try to leverage our dollars with maybe there's a street project in the area or something that we can kind of piggyback off of when they're over by Cooling Camp Park, and then do that project, time it out that way so that maybe we can save some cost on that project.
And
Okay.
Terry, I was thinking that if and when we ever get the extra staff, that would be one thing that takes up a lot of time, but I think would reap a lot of benefits, because there are a lot of grants out there, but they're hard to write. They take a long time. Maybe have to look for them. They don't come to you. So I think that we should utilize as many opportunities as we can to get some grant money.
Do you see me shaking my head, or do you not see video?
No, I see you shaking your
Okay,
head.
I agree. I agree with you.
All right, so is everyone good on Cooling Camp, and just add in a cost, a conservative cost for some paved parking lot?
Good with me.
All right, so with that, then we'll move on to Summerfield Park. Again, this was last replaced in 2004. And I know several of you visited Summerfield Park recently with the trial run of the Magical Park app. And the park was used a lot, but that's actually, Summerfield Park is one of our largest neighborhood parks at 10.8 acres. And when you look at the playground there, it's nice, it's fun, but I just have a picture to kind of show you. It's farther away, but to service that many kids in that neighborhood, it's a pretty basic standard structure, around $50,000 that was put in again in 2004. But given all the space there, this other picture is just kind of a park that kind of wows you. It's in Bemidji. So obviously playgrounds have changed quite a bit in the last 10, 15 years. So it kind of just shows you a difference of, when we make these improvements, it's to really attract people to the community, makes it more desirable. Obviously, people are more attracted to neighborhoods that have parks in close distance. So just kind of shows you a comparative of our pretty simple playground at Summerfield compared to obviously some of the newer, more innovative and inclusive playgrounds that are now available. So just wanted to show that to kind of explain why, why some of these enhancements are needed. Also, I have been out to this park there, just from the years that it's been there. So we are starting to see some wear and tear on this playground. We've had bolts missing that we've replaced and some things shifting a little bit. So, so I just thought given the year of replacement, it's, on the list of our playground replacement plan. And I put some estimates in here. Obviously, we're going to talk about improving accessibility. So we can do some ADA accessibility in the playground, port in place surfacing. I thought this might be another good park to consider, a small basketball court. And then there's only a really small gazebo there, but it might be a nice place to have a picnic shelter. People come here for football games. Again, it's a really big space. So it's just a really nice community gathering area. So those were some of the thoughts that I had. And just want to see what you guys think of this. So this is part of our strategy number 1, to repair, replace, and renew park playgrounds and facilities.
Well, I agree that Summerfield Park there, the playground equipment is not accessible, but for those who can access it, it is a fun place. It's got that huge slide. It's got some things I've never seen in any other park that my grandkids thought was pretty cool and enjoyed it for quite a while. So if we could add the ADA accessible, some like the things that you showed, but still may keep some of those more fun, and there's a little aggressive, I'll say that tall slide for a little kid is a lot of fun, and some of those other things that require some skill to get across it's that equipment is it seemed to be in, usable shape when we were there, and it was fun. And so I'd hate to see, taking away some of the more, I'll say, scary stuff and just replace it with things and replace it if we can add to it and maintain some of that's already there. I think that would be a good idea.
But I agree 100%. I could barely get my grandkids to leave it. They just thought it was the most fun thing they'd ever seen. And so again, I don't like to throw out things that can be saved, even though I know the looks of things change, but look at the safety and everything. But boy, my kids, I agree with you 100%. They didn't want to leave.
Yeah.
Even if you looked at keeping what was there and adding to it,
Yeah.
I think 400,000 is a reasonable price tag for it. Just thinking about if we were thinking about that teen population where we're looking for some amenities for them as well, the basketball courts, that in itself, maybe this is where we've talked about zip lines, maybe this is where we put a piece of equipment, or the obstacle course that we've talked about. Maybe because we've got such a large footprint here, maybe this is where we add something along those lines, even if we don't pull out what's there right now.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I was thinking the same about the zip line. When I was last there were 3 teenagers sitting on the swings on their phones because there's really nothing else at that park other than what you see in that picture, the swings in the playground. There's 2 small benches and the small gazebo off to the side. So I feel like we could really enhance and improve or add on to this playground with whether it's a zip line or basketball courts. Or any combination of the above, but 400,000 is a very conservative number. And I know at least it would be a placeholder for something, and then maybe supplemented with other funds, but at least it's a placeholder to insert in the 10-year financial plan that I think is, a fair number. A zip line in and of itself with surfacing is at least $150,000. So whether we do another piece of playground equipment or something like that, I feel like this is a conservative number for this improvement project.
Okay.
Good.
Anybody else? Tim, did you have any thoughts on this one? Are we okay on Summerfield or?
All
Not
right.
sure which Tim you were talking to, but Tim Gary's all right.
All right. The fishing pier and the lake access improvements. I know this was something that we're going to start working on and having conversations on this year or in 2021. So I don't have a price. I haven't had a chance to see what a comparable fishing pier would cost from another community. So I can certainly add that, but I wanted it to be on the list. And we also talked about improving some of the lake access points. So does anyone have any thoughts on this, or if it's appropriate for the list, I can certainly find a conservative cost estimate from another community.
So Jamie, as far as that pier, so then do we have to get permits from the DNR and things like that too?
Hopefully the DNR would build it.
Okay. I guess that was the thing I was wondering, is if they would build it, or if we're looking at, and then I guess the part of it is, are you looking at a permanent structure? You're looking maybe something on that floats. I was just wondering about that also.
Yeah, this would be a permanent structure. And maybe the question is, because I know that, is this something we include in the 10-year plan, or do we find, do we plan on this as funded through other means? Because I know that some of the Forest Lake Association is going to help fundraise some portion of this. I don't know what percentage we would have funded. I guess I don't know enough on this one yet of what that cost would be.
So even if we looked at, so the DNR does have a grant on this one that would also contribute to this potentially. There's some requirements that have to be met here, but I guess I feel like it should be on here and have a cost associated with it. I think we should decide how many piers we're looking at. Is it one? Is it two? How much more are we, you know what I mean? Where are they going to go? We can figure out later. But I feel like if we don't include it in here, then we already know that a lake association has got the ball rolling. And I guess my question for city council is, if 2021 is a planning year, are you going to force us to put it in 2022? Because if we're going to be forced to put it in and we don't have the funding, then belts goes or something else goes here. If we're going to be, if it's going to be a requirement, because the Lake Association started the ball moving without, I'm just going to be candid, without it being put on our radar and us being given the opportunity to prioritize it. Because we've had this on our list, but again, it gets down to where does it fit in the priority of things? And, you know, maybe from a funding standpoint, if we didn't have funding to do this next year, would we do it? Would we put this in place of belts? Or would we put it in place of something else on that list? So I feel like it should go on here and it should have a number attached to it. And it's not just, I mean, this is an example of, if we're going to put the lakes under parks, trails, and lakes, there has to be a funding element here. And we've also talked a lot about just the lake access in general. And, you know, what are we doing with all those spaces? Because those are opportunities for community to have access to the lakes that aren't on the lake. And so I don't know. I feel passionate about attaching some money to this, and because I think the horse is out of the gate on this one. We all know how this stuff works, unless I'm wrong, but who's going to tell the Lake Association no next year?
I might, because I might say, since you brought it up and we're not ready or we weren't involved, you're going to have a lot of fundraising to do on your own, or get grants on their own, or ask the community to help. But I don't think that we automatically have to be involved at the time that they feel it should be involved.
I agree with you, Karen, but let me put it a different way. Which one of our elected officials is going to tell the Lakes Association no?
Kathy Bystrom, is she still on?
Yes, I am.
Are you still smiling?
So for tonight, though, what we're saying, I think, right, is I agree with you, this needs to be on the list. It needs to have funds attached. And then next kind of run through is where we think it falls, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Correct.
So,
I just don't,
Yeah.
I don't want to see us, I have this gut feeling that it's going to be something we're going to need to do, and we're going to be robbing Peter to pay Paul if we don't. I'd like to see it on the list for funding.
For what year? For what year? Because
but
I
we
don't
haven't
know.
started talking about years yet,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
I
so-
feel like we got off track.
Yeah.
But she made me nervous when she said,
I know.
put belts back. And I thought,
Yeah, me
oh.
too.
No, I was just sorry. I was using that as an example. If we don't ask for money for something and we get forced to do it, something else has to give, because you only have so much money is what I was getting at. So yeah. I got us off track.
So I will keep this on here. I just didn't have time to figure out or get a cost estimate on this, just given the shorter turnaround time from the council meeting to now with the holiday. And haven't really looked into this much, just because I know it just recently came up and I know we're going to have conversations in the future. So I will find out I'll find another community that recently put in a fishing pier, and just see if I can put again, conservative estimate in, just so at least we're putting in some placeholder funds for this.
And over the course of 10 years, are we doing one fishing pier or lake access improvement, or are we doing more than one? Again, thinking 10 years down the road.
Well, I think we should involve the Lake Association up front. What are they thinking about for the fishing pier? What do they expect it to be, and how many if there's more than one, how many and where are they?
Those,
Well, isn't there a fishing pier out in the lake that's
Shield
by-
Lake.
Shield
yeah,
Lake.
Shield Lake, right?
What-
And I guess my other question is, does the Army Corps of Engineers get involved with these sorts of things? Because, and then question number two is, who was in control of the outlet for Forest Lake or off on North Shore? Was that an Army Corps project, or was that just a Forest Lake project or DNR project? Because again, they would have some interest in that also.
So maybe I should have been a little more blunt. How many, when Jamie puts a budget figure in here, is she budgeting for one pier in 10 years or what? I get that we still need to bring groups together and we still need to look at all the access places around the lake and make some recommendations, but how many, what do we want Jamie to budget for in a 10-year cycle? One pier, two piers?
Oh. My question is like Shields Lake or Clear Lake. So are you saying just one or two per? Just say one. We do a one on Forest Lake and one on Clear Lake then, or do we need to kind of take a little tally of the lakes and within Forest Lake?
I think that we're looking at for the citywide, not specifying or getting down, is one fishing pier, like a one nice fishing pier in the city of Forest Lake sufficient? Regardless
See, I
of
think,
Forest Lake or Clear Lake.
I think you should be looking at not only Forest Lake, but Clear Lake. You know, because I don't know there's much, you know, financial support for Sylvan Lake. Or whatever that's been now named, but I would definitely think you should be looking at two, one in Clear and one in Forest.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree with that. And my question is what are the properties that we have on Clear? Do we have? I know that we had discussed and had a map of the small plots on Forest Lake. Do we have several of those easements on Clear?
There is one on Fondant Avenue. There is no parking. That's one thing. There is no space for parking. The public access is a DNR public access, and it's pretty much full. That would be the one area where there could be a fishing pier from that parking lot. Otherwise, there isn't any parking space that would be available to the one city piece of narrow property that I'm aware of.
But remember, tonight, we don't have to pick which lake it's going on, and we don't have to pick where it's going. We just need do we want one pier for all of Forest Lake? Do we want 10 piers for all of Forest Lake? So, because when Jamie goes to look at budget and puts a number in here, is it for 1, 2, 10?
I think you do two. I think you get one going on Forest Lake and you get one going on Clear Lake, and go from there.
I agree, because the one at Shields Lake is still used, so we would
Correct.
have.
Yep.
I agree.
Yep.
Okay,
But
so
Shields Lake needs to be fixed a little bit too. So, but I agree with just putting two on the budget.
Yeah, me
Okay.
too.
I'll put 2 on the budget for this item here, fishing pier lake access improvements.
Well, then one last thought is, or do we need to have 3 and so we can get rid of one in negotiating? Will they give us 2, or do we have to ask for 3 and then
I was
settle
going to say, zip. Kathy,
Yeah.
could you dismiss yourself? Just kidding.
La,
Earmuffs.
la, 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 la.
Go big or go
I believe
home.
it's being recorded.
I would just add that I'm not sure if all of you are aware, but when Jerry Grentner proposed this idea during the Forest Lake Association presentation to the council, I think our guidance was to work with Parks, Trails, and Lakes and use 2021 as a planning year, a planning and grant seeking year. So that, you
Yes.
know, gives you a little cushion of time, you know, to, I guess, make the determinations around, you know, what you can do. I mean, I'm not saying don't put it all in the budget, but I'm just saying, I think you got a little time to really finalize a plan around 1, 2, 3, where are they going, you know, all of that kind of thing.
Yeah. And since that council meeting, I have been in contact with the Lake Association. They are scheduled for our February meeting to start that conversation in 2021. Once we session, so we will have those conversations, but just haven't yet. So it's, like I said, a little not as clear as what those costs may be and some of those details. So I can find that out and insert a cost.
And maybe then we put that ask in our 10-year budget, you know, for 2022 for one of them, and then spread one down to, you know, 2024, something like
Yeah.
that, where it's spread out through the 10-year cycle.
Yeah. So Jamie, let's skip over trails since we're going to be talking about trails in January, like outlining where those would be. And is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. My only comment is I am meeting with our city engineer just to talk a little bit tomorrow, and I'll just try to get an idea from him. Obviously, trails are going to be expensive, and I'll just see if he can make sure that I have a conservative placeholder in there for trail development. It has been noted, and we do have quite a bit of trail development that's happened, and I know we have a couple big projects coming up with MnDOT in 2023 and 2024. But what our goal is going to be when we talk with our city engineer is finding those trail gaps that we need to connect to have a meaningful, complete trail connection. So I'll just make sure I just put in $1 million, just because I know other communities have, for $1 million had kind of that same, they were filling in some gaps, and I think they were able to do a few different ones. Obviously, I know it depends on how big the trails are, what kind of material they're using. So I'll just make sure whatever number I have there as a placeholder will be appropriate given what we think we need to do. And we can fine tune that.
All right. So then we're on to the dog park.
There again, I was a lot younger. I didn't even have the same opinion as I do now. And you know, it takes me a long time to change my opinion. But I was so against dog parks when they came up. And the research that we did at that time just blew me away. And now I add the number of people that have got dogs through this COVID. And I think, wow, we've got to keep that on and be serious about that one of these years. I think we're one of the only cities that does not have a dog park. That was a long time ago. We did that research.
Yeah. I agree that this is a big one. It's one I hear
all the time.
A request for all the time, whether it's social media or the other time I've talked to people. Why don't we have a dog park? Looking for that place to take their dog to run, a little more than they can in even their backyard. So.
Well, our demographics are changing, and we're building more apartments than we had.
Right.
And so.
And that might be a good spot. I can't think of the
Southview.
Behind McCullough, Jamie.
Yeah, Southview.
Southview.
But for tonight, we don't have to pick a location.
I was waiting for that.
We're going to take it all and get it all done tonight.
Yeah, I think it has to be on the list.
So this is again a conservative estimate. Dog parks can range from your pretty basic fenced in area with some benches, and you can be a little more elaborate. So we can look at this, but I think it's a conservative number as a placeholder for the 10-year financial plan.
Yeah, fencing, that was based off in 900, I think, linear feet of fencing. So if we use an existing park location, that saves us obviously some land acquisition money. And so.
Well, when we went to Southview, that did look like it would be a good site, although there's no parking. But So we're just talking about, do we want it or not? Yes, that's a good idea.
All right, anything else on that one? Otherwise, we can talk about the recreational hub.
Okay.
Gosh, I may as well be right up front with it. I thought when we were talking about Aqua, and maybe we're not supposed to talk about where or what tonight, but I really kind of thought it was just a wishful dream out there in the clouds that would never ever come. And then it seemed to me that people on our commission were getting serious about it. Talking out in the community, I have found absolutely no support for it. In fact, I've heard a lot of not support for it. But you're maybe talking more general. I mean, maybe you're not talking about purchasing the restaurant.
I would see this as not purchasing the restaurant. It's a placeholder for if we think about the senior center, at some point, we're either going to have to modernize it and upgrade it, and just doing a little research on what it costs to bring it up to, I'll use up to code, and I'll use the word code in quotes, could be a pretty sizable chunk. So do we look at identifying a new hub and getting rid of that existing senior center? Or when you look at the 10-year plan, when they looked at building a new facility for fire department and public works, is there a partnership here between that where we're leveraging off of another project potentially? Or do we, if we don't put a recreational hub in here, I think we need to put a placeholder for upgrading that senior center, or I don't know what the term would be, upgrading or revitalizing, or something.
I think the recreational hub is a really good idea for as Forest Lake keeps growing. I mean, you could actually incorporate, whether it be at wherever, you could incorporate a lot into that building. So you could, just for an example, I mean, you'd have the senior center. We could probably maybe rent some of that space out for a party or something that you could go to. So and then if like they say, like the senior center was ready to fall down or something, I mean, the city could sell that land for and put it in that way. So I kind of think it's a good idea for as Forest Lake grows.
I like having something in here as a placeholder, and maybe it's out a little further into our plan because there's obviously a lot of discussion and due diligence to do on it. But having it as a placeholder in our 10-year plan seems to make some sense to me.
I'm fine for that. I mean, the senior center is adequate, but in the growing, I can see where something would have to be done. But in talking to the seniors, they were the most against moving them way out, what they call way out there. We'll never get out there. And they didn't like that idea at all. So if you're thinking you can incorporate, if we're back to talking about the restaurant and that.
No, I don't.
No, I
look at this, I don't think of the restaurant. I just think that was a conversation in one of our meetings as a what if.
Yeah.
But I could be wrong.
That's kind of how I view it too. I think
Okay.
In every feedback that I've heard has been, against buying that property. So, but we do have this, we've taken over the senior center. There is going to be costs to it, whether, to Terry's point, whether it's upgrading the senior center itself or putting a different building in place somewhere. It's certainly going to have a cost, and we need to account for it in the 10-year plan.
I agree with that.
I would add there are a lot, there are, and they're trending upward. Lots of grants. I'm not quite sure if they're capital grants or not, but there's a lot of senior money out there because we are aging and we will continue to age throughout the United States right through 2035. the goal is on reducing costs by keeping seniors eating well, physically active, socially connected, in spaces like senior centers within communities. So I think it's a good time to, take a look at either, upgrading or getting, starting to, look at grants or looking for funding to either upgrade or create a space, a new space. But I agree with Karen. I think you've got to keep accessibility front and center with the senior population. I think you'll lose it if it's not, kind of centrally located a few miles from home and, that kind of thing. So it's hard enough for them to drive.
Well,
And I
and then,
agree. Oh, go ahead, Tim.
well, I guess one of the things that I have done over the last probably month is chatted with a number of people who I used to have it listed for sale and for lease. Now they've gotten a different realtor, but in the meantime, I've contacted a number of people that are involved with either municipal restaurants, and also groups that have restaurants on the water, looking at the possibility or the interest of would they be interested in leasing space to run their own restaurant. So as an example, you may have a spot where you could rent out paddle boards and paddle boats and things like that. You could have a spot where you could have, a business meeting or a small party or whatever else. And at the same time, still have like a concession area. And then the facility has been approved for 24 boat slips, and they rent out 20, or they've been approved for 24. They've got dockage for 20. And so when the restaurant was there, the slips are being rented for $2,000 for the season. So again, there's some kind of guaranteed income with that. There are some other different ways of financing that you don't necessarily have to come up with all the cash. But there's some other creative ways of working things. And if we had lease spaces and different things like this, it isn't necessarily that we'd be responsible for the whole nut. You could again have people either be in the concession stand, leasing out, party places, renting equipment, etc.
Yeah, I guess I think those are all really good comments. And I think there's a lot of unknowns and a lot of work to do in this area yet. We're just starting to get more involved with the senior center. Myself, I've been having conversations about the building itself and what are some of the big expenses we may foresee in the next 10 years with the furnace or the air conditioning. What are some of the roof's going to be replaced in 5 years, things like that. So I think we need some time to figure out kind of the future of the senior center, if it's something that we're going to continue to repair and maintain. It was built in 1984, kind of with, in a time during the township there. So, I think it's definitely getting a little older and it's going to start to require some repair and maintenance. So I think we need to, as a city, evaluate what some of those costs might look like. I also think there's conversation to have with the public works facility, what that timeline is on if we're going to still have that public works facility. So I think there's a lot of evaluation there to do with the senior center. Maybe there's partnership opportunities with the YMCA and their Silver Sneakers program. But I do like having a placeholder in because as Councilmember Bystrom mentions, there's going to be that big focus on active seniors and just, a healthy Forest Lake community. So maybe it's either a recreation hub or a community health hub or something. But I think that could fall under a strategy for a new community. I think there's gonna be a need for some community amenity or facility, kind of to be determined what that's gonna look like. So I think it's kind of hard today to really nail down exactly what that's gonna be. But I think if you guys agree that it's either investments to replace and repair the senior center and or an additional recreation hub, it's a good placeholder to have in there. And I agree with Betty that it's probably later down in the 10-year plan, once we have some time to evaluate.
Jamie, I think I just want to make sure I get this said while I'm thinking about it, since you're thinking about all of this, you're thinking about this big picture. I think there is a lot of opportunity with the kitchen in that facility. If it could be turned into more of a commercial kitchen. We do not have Meals on Wheels in the city of Forest Lake. We direly need it. But it has to be, those need to be prepared in a commercial kitchen. So so there is a service possibility that, you know, maybe should be just to have it on your radar, or have it on the Parks, Trails and Lakes Commission radar as something to consider from a programming perspective.
Yeah, I think that's good to note. And we do have that nice kitchen there and just some improvements to it to make sure it's operating. We could, you know, rent the facility out more for weddings or other groups and things like that. So if it's not even, you know, if we decide down the road to keep the senior center, what if it's expanding to it, you know, or adding on to it or something like that to make it a bigger recreation hub. We do have the tower rink there with outdoor rinks. So there could be potential for expansion in the future, some kind of improvement to that. So
you could do daily senior dining in there too. I mean, one of the things I've learned lately in working in partnership with the Y around meal distribution is our seniors are really struggling in that regard. And there aren't a whole lot of resources here. So, so that I think should be kind of top of mind as you're looking at capital improvements in that space.
And 2 million is a very conservative estimate, because looking at what some other cities have done, it's ranged anywhere from over 3 million up to 10 million. And so, you know, I think it's a conservative estimate for this, and then probably would require some grant funding and other resources.
And again, I think if we're looking at redoing or working with the senior center, that's kind of a high price, but I don't know what that property is going to be used for next term, because it's an absolute ideal place for a senior center with the elementary school right across the street. They do an awful lot of interaction with them. And so that if we could, I don't know if are they going to think of getting rid of that? What used to be the old fire hall? Because boy, that opens up a whole lot of land area that you could do a lot of the recreational pieces and bigger kitchen. But I just think that space has to be really considered.
Well, new public works building is on the radar.
So they would take that one down then?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what the plan would be with it. I mean, we
Okay.
haven't gotten that far into planning. I'm not sure how, you know, if they would just level it, if it's salvageable. I know it's in pretty rough shape. So, and it's too small.
Yes,
It's pretty
definitely
gross.
could be
It's small.
bigger.
Yeah.
And the basement area, I don't think that many of the seniors can use that at all. Doesn't LATV use that? Well, anyway, we're probably getting off the
yeah,
off
there's a
the
lot.
beat here. I
there's a
just
lot
think
to
2
figure out
million
with
is
that.
scary. But it's only on paper.
So are we missing anything on this list that we wanted, that's not on here, that we think is important to be on here?
The only thing I wanted to bring up, Terry, is I know we talked about I know that we're eventually going to be looking at more than just playgrounds, but it's important to note that we did talk about developing a playground replacement plan so that we aren't in a situation where all of a sudden we have 6 playgrounds that are falling apart or need to be replaced. So it's more of a strategy to plan for the funding and tackle 1 or 2 playgrounds a year, at least until we're caught up. So we do have, just quickly looking at this, we did put Summerfield on this list. We do have Belts on this list, and we have Coolin Camp on this list. So that's 3 parks. I didn't know if we wanted to talk about Southview. I know we talked about the dog park. Previous conversations, we have presented to City Council concept plans for new playground at Southview Park. There was concern about the location. If we just put new playground equipment where it was previously. It's kind of tucked away, not a lot of parking. But then we also talked about looking into potentially removing some of the brush, you know, the wooded area in the neighborhood, and potentially bring it more in the neighborhood. So I just wanted to bring this up. If do we need to add one more playground to the list?
So we have Fenway,
Fenway.
Summerfield, Cooling Camp, and Belts, right?
Fenway is not playground replacement. That's just expansion.
Oh,
We call Southview Dog Playground.
Well, we'd
another-
have to add that cost in, I suppose, with the playground at Southview, though. Is that just the dog part estimate that you have on there?
Right now is just a dog park. But if we think we would want to look into putting playground equipment there again, I mean, there is quite a bit of residential in the area. So if we're going to do the dog park, you know, it might make good sense to incorporate a new playground there, whether it's in the existing area and we, you know, reconstruct the area so that there's the dog park and the playground, or if we look into more in the neighborhood residential area, which would require taking some trees down and things like that.
So how many do we have on the radar? Sorry, we have Belts,
So right now we have the Belts project,
Belts,
playground,
Cooling Camp.
Cooling Camp, and Summerfield.
So in all reality, I know it's a 10-year plan, but 2021 is already gone. So it's technically a 9-year plan in all reality.
Right.
And so if our goal was 1 to 2 parks a year,
Here's that list again, just to see.
No, I'm getting a little confused. This is playground replacement. When we were talking about 1 to 2 parks that we're gonna kind of revitalize, that could obviously include playground replacement, but it doesn't inherently mean that we're gonna do the playground itself, right? I just think 2 playgrounds a year, I mean, when we only have 2, 4, 9 of them, that's gonna be done in 3 years, if that's really the number we're looking at getting. And it
right?
seems-
Because
seems aggressive. Maybe we take and say that by the end of the 10-year plan, based on the dates of these, that we would want to replace each of these and then just put in an ask, you know, each year from just a simply playground perspective, and ask for, I think they run around, what, 25,000? Is that the last one we bought, Jamie?
Yeah, really small, complete with installation and swings was 23,000.
So
But
maybe we do a
But one like at
ask, or
Southview would be probably closer to 60,000, wouldn't it, Jamie?
Yeah, I mean, playgrounds really have a really wide range. I think we talked about, you know, more adding playgrounds and features with ADA compliance or ADA accessibility. And then right now our surfacing has been either the engineered wood fiber chips or we have the black rubber mulch. And we talked about not continuing with that moving forward. So we have more ADA accessible surfacing. So that's obviously a little more expensive. So, you know, I think after the next step in this is if we put these parks on here for improvements, we can then start looking at them specifically to say, you know, going through that design concept and take a little more time with that. So we know what our budget is and we kind of work backwards to say, here's our budget, you know, here, what are some of our options that we can have for equipment.
well, and we talked about revitalizing, and we said revitalizing 1 to 2 parks per year. That includes inclusive equipment and features and addresses gaps. So in my mind, it doesn't automatically rubber stamp mean we're just putting park equipment there. It could mean a walking trail through there. And so do we have enough on the 10-year plan for now? And then look at what do we really, the ones that aren't on this list, what do we really want to do with them? And what gap are we trying to address?
Yeah, you're correct. I think it's kind of twofold. If we thing that if we have a playground right now, we need to make sure we maintain it properly. So after a certain life cycle of 15 to 20 years, you know, if it becomes a safety issue, we either have to remove it or replace it. That's the playground structure. But we did also talk about filling in gaps. So do we want an archery? Do we want to bring archery to a park? Do we want a zip line? Do we want, you know, another community gardens, or what are those gaps that we need to fill? So I think those are in addition to some of these playground replacements.
See, I don't know that I would put playground replacements at all of these. I don't know. I guess the question for tonight is, do we want to add more parks to this list?
I think with what we have going on, I think that's, for a 10-year plan, I think that's, I think there's a lot on the list.
It's probably a lot, and really what we're looking at too is if we're looking at phasing out like a Belts in Summerfield, I think the price tag was higher on, you know, some of those other ones, even Cooling Camp. Is that going to be a phased process? I mean, realistically, is that going to be a phased process for each one of them? And each one of those phases would kind of meet what we were discussing with our overall 1 to 2 parks a year, because some of them are just much larger. It's one thing to say we can take, like we did with the equipment we just bought at 27,000 or whatever, and say, okay, that's a bucket. Maybe we add now in here that we also would like to get one smaller park each year. You know, we've got these 4 main parks that we're, you know, going to have a phased approach in potentially in each one. Do we then also, again, it's an ask, and it's something that we're looking at as part of the plan, but it's not inherent that we're going to get it right. So do we then say maybe we want, you know, 25,000 for that extra piece, or 50,000 a year to do those small revitalization pieces to fulfill that 1 to 2 parks a year?
I think, Tim, you're right on that, because, you know, we've got 25 actual parks around the area, but some of them are just a wide spot in the road. This way we could, if you had like a premier project, like say Belts or Fenway or, you know, Cooling Camp or whatever, and then have a smaller project, you know, like a $25,000 to $50,000 project, you know, to get, maybe it's another dog park, maybe it's just, you know, small equipment just to get the development of that particular park started. So once we're past our 10-year plan, we can come back and improve those new ones, you know, a little bit better.
I agree.
But-
We've got
Oh, go
some
ahead.
that need attention. I never remember if it's Dusty Trails, Windy Acres. What's the one over off of South Shore Drive? It's just tucked in
Shady
there.
Trail?
Yeah, that's the one. I know there's a gentleman that lives in that area, and that he would like to get a group together and open that up again to walking and bird feeders, and because there isn't anything in there, and it's an older neighborhood. So I think with what we've got on the list, I think we're good.
Yeah, I
Well,
think. Oh, go ahead,
I-
Doug.
Well, I think that if you look at the 2014 plan, what happened with all the things that were recommended there and what didn't happen,
Yeah.
I think we need to include some of these smaller parks to get them up to a standard where they're actually a park. I'll take Clear Lake Park, for example, because I know that one pretty well. It said, construct a small shelter. There's no shelter. Provide seating. There's one bench. Expand and improve the basketball court. Didn't happen. It's a little patch of broken up asphalt. Upgrade the playground equipment. It was changed and put in the rubber, the shredded rubber. Provide a small parking area. Didn't happen. Not necessary. Plant shade trees. There's not a bit of shade to be found. Install bioswales to keep it from flooding. It floods every time it rains. And then provide off-street trail connection to Hardwood Creek Trail. Isn't necessary. They can use the street. The street's not very busy. So, you know, we've identified previously needs, and now are we just going to leave all of those alone, or are we going to, you know, I would I support doing 2 a year or keeping up with that to keep the parks we have going in addition to these big projects that we have.
Do we almost have to, I mean, I think part of the problem with the 2014 plan, we have to update that. I think part of the problem is it was a great exercise in doing something and then we didn't fund it or support it. So nothing, not nothing, but the vast majority of it didn't get completed. So if we were to look through that plan again, would we have the same vision for those parks? Maybe some of them we would, some of them we wouldn't. And so do we look at, if we think about this as iteration 1, do we say, okay, Jamie, let's give this to council now for 10-year plan and make note of the fact that we're not done and there's more that needs to be done once we update the 10-year or the 2014 plan. And I guess I would be kind of curious to hear Kathy's take on, if we iterate it like that, are we missing an opportunity, or do you think we should put the smaller park placeholder in here? Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think you need to paint a comprehensive picture right off the bat. And I mean, that's what I would like to see. I'd like to understand, and I think any new council member coming in, and we do have a new one coming in, you know, to be able to better understand the scope of the work of the commission and what needs to be done, right? To get our, to get our parks up to the standard that you would like to see them and the community as a whole would like to see them. And I think, you know, certainly I support that 100%. I mean, is there a way to...
What's the timing of it, Kathy? Like, I know we talked, we were not represented, right? To some degree. So we talked about needing to get some numbers here, and what's the timing of that? Do we let these numbers go and then go back and work, or do we hold these numbers and then do the work for the smaller parks? And if we hold them, do we miss out? What's the timing look like?
Well, you know, I think the sooner the better. I mean, you know, we know full well not much is going to get funded in 2021 because the budget's pretty set already, right? And we can't increase the budget right now. I mean, I think when Patrick, you know, offered the additional $50,000 for parks this in 2021, he did some shifting of the budget a little bit, so it would at least kind of give parks a jump start as we are trying to flesh the rest of this out. I would say it would really be ideal to have, I would share this document that you're working on or working off of right now. I would share this document with the full council as a kind of a working document, with the idea that you would have this potentially laid out over that 10-year period of time, your proposal over the 10-year period of time, by the first quarter of 2021. Because we will start to think about budget by the end of first quarter of 2020. I mean, we're always thinking about budget, but we'll really start thinking seriously about budget at the end of first quarter of 2021 and start having some conversations about needs in second quarter. And then in August, we're working on budget numbers and getting everything in place. So, but we need to jump ahead of that. So by the end of second quarter, to really have a solid sense of what we need for 2022. And then of course, beyond.
So then do we just put a place, going back to what, Doug said, using Clear Lake as whatever, we had neighborhood parks, we had premier parks, we had the different levels of parks, and I can't remember all of them. Do we just put a placeholder here for a 10-year plan of revamping 2 additional neighborhood parks or something, and then put $100,000 on it?
Yeah, I mean, do you have a sense of, as you look at each of these and the work that you're proposing, do you have a sense of how that could be phased in? Or do you, so here's what I'm kind of seeing in my head, right? Similar to the 10-year comprehensive plan we're working on for the other departments. You've got year by year by year laid out. And then on your left-hand column, you're listing the parks.
Yep.
And then over the course of those 10 years, maybe 2022, 2023, we phase in Belts Park. And these are the projects we propose and the dollar amount attached to that. And then maybe you front load some of that for 2022. You have a little bit left in 2023, and then you can pick up another major park in 2023 that kind of overlaps a little bit, or one of your smaller projects that overlaps a little bit. And so you're laying that out from 2023 to 2025 or whatever. So, I mean, that would be really helpful.
Yeah.
So that would be kind of the next step, is now, once we figure out what we want to do in these 10 years, how do we phase it over? Because like you said, 2021, we should not count on any funding for 2021 other than redevelopment. If we get 50,000, it's a gift because that budget's already done. So we have to work. To me, 2021 is a wash unless it comes through grants or park dedication.
And I think you can start looking at that, because I think you can start saying, okay, we have this project planned for 2024, but wow, here's a great grant.
Yep.
We're gonna write it, we'll win it, let's accelerate that project, right? Let's move it up in the queue. I think this document is fluid, but at least it gives council a sense of what expenditures are needed to move these projects forward year after year after year after year.
So what if we,
Go ahead,
Sorry.
Go ahead, Terry.
I was just going to say, what if we do this? What if we add another thing to that list, which is a placeholder for 2 additional parks to be revamped, TBD, and put a cost in there as a placeholder. And then when we work on looking at over the course of the 10 years, if we take Belts and we figure out how many years that's going to go over and what our cost is, we can get then to those 2 additional parks, and we can indent what those parks will be and what years they'll be in.
Yeah, I think this is a great opportunity to paint a really comprehensive picture of kind of current state and need and plan.
So how do we do this? So let me ask this, Kathy, because we have this, right?
Mhm.
Which is this comprehensive 2014 plan. And it needs to be updated. I think we'd all probably agree. And one of the things on there is each park and what was wanted for each park with that cost there. So short term, we can't get this done in time for the next, right? I mean, part of the issue with the budget is that, again, we're looking at 20 million for a new facility and 50,000 for parks. So it's just not, we don't have time to get this done and still make the budget conversations that are happening or going to happen. So does it I guess, does it make sense to submit that list that we've got with the caveat that we're adding to it? And then we turn our attention to this plan and we walk through and update that. So at least we have a seat at the table.
Yeah, and then map it out. So council has an understanding on an annual basis what the proposal is financially. So, you've got an overlap between Park A and Park B and maybe a launch in 2022. You've got an overlap between Park A and Park B in 2023. What does that bottom line look like? Does that make sense? So, or if you're phasing in belts, for example, over 3 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I think, some justification around, why you're doing what you're doing. What are we, or how are we analyzing where we're starting? I mean, are we looking at utilization? Are we looking at age? Are we looking at, ADA compliance? Those sorts of things.
All of the above.
All of the above.
And also, does it do anything to give council a picture of how long we've been working on some of these things, trying to get them done? Because I mean, they will well remember how many years ago we talked about some of these things.
Yeah. And my goal is to get them done. I mean,
Right.
I'm so tired of talking about this and not moving the dial, but I think it's easier for us to understand need when it's mapped out more comprehensively like that. And it's a fluid document. It's just a proposal. Things ebb, flow,
Right.
funding becomes available, grants become available, things move around, but at least that maps it out in a single document somebody can take a look at to say, this is the proposal.
It's a good
So
idea.
I like all of that. And the 10-year plan, the next step of putting the timeline together. I've seen the full 26 pages of the city's financial plan. So I'm familiar with Councilmember Bystrom's talking about of all the years, the projects. We might do $250,000 for Belts Park in 2022, but we're also going to ask for $100,000 that same year for something else. So I think that is a good next step. I think, this is a good tie-in to some of the conversation with Councilmember, or Commissioner Ramseth bringing up the Clear Lake Park example. When I look through the 2014 plan, there are a lot of things that may not be relevant anymore. There may be things that have been done. There may be things that have changed priorities. And really what happened is, this is a great document, but when this was completed in June of 2014, then funding was cut further and staff was reduced, and there was $0, actually -$, in the park dedication fund. And we've been these last 5 years without any funding to do anything in this plan. So here we are 6 years later, and I think, it comes at a good time because I think it should be updated to reflect parks, trails, and lakes. And I did reference there is some grant funding right now to help with parks master planning. So I do want to explore that. The grant is due December 16th, and it would give us up to $10,000 to help with this next step in this master planning. I'm going to share my screen one more time. And I think maybe that $10,000, if we apply for this grant, might be helpful for us to even focus on kind of the Councilmember Bystrom's plan or comment on by the end of Q1, package it together of here's our document. Terry found this with Brooklyn Park, and I've seen other similar ones, but this is their plan for reinvesting their park system. So it's a similar 10-year plan, but it kind of outlines some of the things of how has it been developed and funded in the past. It talks about some of these questions. I think Councilmember Bystrom would be helpful for council to understand, why are we doing this? Why are these our priorities? So we could do a little recap, and then they break down kind of, more specifically, but then they go into all the different areas, like we've talked about, and really outline what those needs are. So do you think something like this would be helpful if we use, consider using some of those grant dollars to finalize a working document like this? Would that be helpful for commissioners and council?
So Jamie, who's going to do this work? Can you stop sharing your screen for a second? Because we have the day-to-day work. Now we need to get some budget numbers in, right? We've got to update this 14 plan. Is our direction then, Jamie, stop any other activities? And this becomes the primary focus until we get this done, so that we make sure we're on the radar for budget and strategic planning? Because part of me worries about, we just give council the worksheet that we just did. The second question they're going to ask is, well, what's the timing of this, right? And we'll get there, but this all takes time. And so are you going to, I guess, who's going to do this work?
Yeah, well, I think if we focus, if we would apply for this grant with it just being our 10-year master plan and put aside the 2014 plan for right now, and someone like Bolton and Mank we would contract with them to do essentially lead and do the work on it. So they would be able to help with that. And maybe the focus is just the 10-year plan, master plan, and not maybe revitalizing the 2014 parks plan is a bigger project than we need to tackle right now, but we use it as a guide, and we just focus on our final 10-year plan, extrapolating what we would need from the plan. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but if we don't get this grant to have Bolton Mank do that, then what?
Am I missing something? But didn't we give kind of a broad outline, all of us, on what our priorities are? And wouldn't it be a matter of Jamie sitting down and looking at the document we just all went through and just prioritizing what we kind of all talked about? I mean, does it have to be a fancy document that they need for the council, or would this just be our worksheet updated with times?
So I guess the other question that I have is, so along with the 10-year plan, I hate to ask, but where's Jamie, where's the other person that's supposed to kind of help?
The communications recreation position.
Yeah.
We are in the hiring process of that right now. So we are doing interviews, I believe, starting next week.
Okay.
When this might be a good time, when there's lack of activity for anything else going on, it would be a good time to concentrate just on this project.
I don't think there's a lack of activity going on when we acquire a senior center and then have to figure out fee structures for Fenway and.
But I don't think that's going on right now. I think that's in our plan.
No,
It's
it's
all
going on
happening
right now.
It's all happening.
Just to get the costs, you mean? We're not doing anything remodeling or taking down or making any decisions on that. But right now,
somebody still has to manage the senior center day-to-day stuff. All the work that Sharon did, that work is still happening. Even if,
well, except it's completely closed. Other than that, there is, the senior center isn't operating right now.
Right. So I think we're getting a little off track, but
Yeah.
there are some things that are still happening for the senior center. There are things that we are still working through. It's not as much as a workload as it was a month ago when we were still in operation, but there are still things that are happening. And fees for Fenway are due in January. So I think Terry's question is what is the expectation of the commission and timeline wise, so we don't miss the opportunity? And maybe it's as simple as providing, like Councilmember Bystrom said, this document and just adding a little more detail with the reason and the year, and just submit that as it's a working document. And here's our request to insert into the 10-year financial plan.
And I would be happy to take that document. I'd like to see the full list of parks on there. I'd like to see the full scope of the work you guys are involved in, whether it has any detail or dollars attached to it at all. But I would be happy to bring that to the next council meeting. And when I do my my meeting update for Parks, Trails and Lakes. I'll physically hand out this document to each of the council members and say, you know, this was the document from our last meeting. The next step for this is to map this out over the course of the next 10 years. They expect to have that work done in the first quarter of 2021.
Sounds good to me.
Is there a format? There must be a format that the council is used to seeing for the planning and budgeting process, and why wouldn't we put everything that we're doing in that same format with the explanation as to why we're doing it? Is that document already exists that the other departments use?
Yeah, I think there's something similar that probably could be modified a little bit. I think, you know, I think certainly you have, you know, typically like with Public Works, for example, it's a new truck, right? So it's a new truck and it's a dollar amount attached to that truck. You know, you guys, if you're going to do, for example, a phase in, you'd want some detail with each of the years of that phase in, what is actually going to occur and what are the dollar amounts attached to that. So I think it's a little more complex, but I still think it's doable.
Sure.
You know, I get the 2014 plan. There's a lot of detail in there, but man alive, I look at that and I go, so what does this mean for 2020? Or what does this mean for 2021? For me to be able to look at a single sheet or a couple of sheets, you know, to say, this is the plan, this is what we're thinking we need, especially when we head into budget season. It's a lot easier than having to try to sort through and, you know, understand what it is you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah,
So
and Doug, I was just going to say really quick, we do have like a capital improvement, it's just like capital improvement planning. We do a 5-year capital improvement plan. We've had that for parks, but we don't our funding is strictly park dedication. So it's never general fund impact. So really it's just been a copy and paste all these years of the same projects because we haven't had funding to do that. So that's why we're in this situation. We have a laundry list of projects to do because we just haven't had funding over several years to do them. So we've kicked the can down the road essentially. And so this is the first time we've been given the opportunity or the exercise to really look at future thinking of what is our park system. So not only do we have some catch-up work to do, we're also thinking of the potential growth and changes in the community in the next 10 years. So it's a lot of information. The 10-year plan is very detailed. And I think tonight, hopefully we feel comfortable with at least the bigger items. I think it is a good list of cumulative of everything that we've talked about. And I do think there's still some more work, to Doug's point about the smaller parks and all those. There's still that scope of work to be done of some of those smaller parks and those improvements that need to be addressed. So I think those can be extrapolated and presented to council kind of in a lumped group of other park improvements to be completed.
So if we do what Kathy's saying, just to kind of wrap it up, because we're almost out of time now. But if we just take that Word document and you add all the parks to it, leave the dollar figures on there for the ones that we have dollar figures on, and don't include a dollar figure on the additional parks that are not on there. And then Kathy can just say it will be forthcoming in the first quarter. And then maybe what we can do is we need to think about maybe not redoing this whole plan, but for a future meeting, looking at each one of these parks and what we want to do to it, which will help us calculate the cost. Does that sound like an okay summary of next steps?
Yeah, and I think just being able to say, you know, this was part of the 2014 plan. We are reassessing, you know, some of the information that was highlighted in that plan because it's been 6 years. And these are the areas, this is what we do know, because that's what council asked for, right? Tell us what you do know, which is kind of what you highlighted tonight. These are the other parks we have. These are the needs we identified back in 2014. we're going to reassess these now and maybe look at some prioritization with each of these, and then kind of map out these proposed expenses and over the course of the next 10 years, and that'll be done in first quarter. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Good deal.
I mean, I think that's the way I'd like to look at it, and I think it would be really, really helpful for everybody to be able to
So
say.
that way you've got something to take to the meeting next Monday as well.
Mhm.
And Patrick's got something that he can incorporate some initial numbers in there.
And actually, we don't meet next Monday. We won't meet again now till
The 14th.
the 14th. Yeah. We don't typically meet the
Because
first.
that'll
one.
give me a couple more days to get that wrapped up and packaged up for council.
That'll be good. If you need any help, we'll send Terry along with you again. She'll scare him.
What are you saying?
You did a good job. You got your point across.
Ian, you were on tape.
Yeah.
Scary is not a word I would use. I would say firm and passionate and correct.
Yeah.
Enough is enough. There comes a point at which you just say, listen, I'm giving a lot of my own time and expertise to this, and what for, if you aren't going to listen to what I have to say. So
Clear message.
Well, Kathy, thank you for tonight. I think it's been very helpful to get
Yeah, thank you.
an idea of what actually, would make some sense for you and the council. So that's good. Thank you.
And
Yes,
I'm
thank
a
you.
fan. I mean, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I am a champion for the work you're doing and for the parks in our community. I think they're an incredible asset to they add a whole, I mean, they just improve quality of life, for our citizens. And we need some level of investment in them. But what I always say is I'm one council member, right? So we've got to work the group and give them a plan. A financial plan they can live with, and then have conversations about where those dollars are coming from every year, a combination of council commitment and grants and whatever, fundraising or whatever, because we can always revisit it on an annual basis.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you,
All right,
everybody.
you have a motion
Thank
to
you.
adjourn?
So moved.
So moved.
Second?
I'll second Karen's
Okay.
motion.
Okay.
All in favor?
I
All right.
All
Hi.
right. Thank
everyone.
you, everybody.
Thank
Have a good
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.